Welcome to this video on how to automate your data management tasks using Azure Storage Actions. My name is Santosh Chandwani, and I'm a principal product manager on the Azure Storage team. Today, we're going to talk about what is Azure Storage Actions. We're going to look at how you can actually simplify your data management tasks using this cool new feature that we introduced, and what are some of the common use cases. So let's dive in. So today, with the exponential growth in your data estates, it is common for Azure Storage customers to have thousands of storage accounts with billions or even hundreds of billions of objects in single accounts. And effective data management on such vast data estates is really essential for businesses to be able to fully leverage their data assets, to meet compliance regulations, reduce their costs, and of course, to safeguard their sensitive information. But the tools and methods that are available are very limited. It's unsustainable for customers to keep increasing those resource investments at the same pace at which the data volumes are growing. That's why we built Azure Storage Actions. This is a fully managed platform that transforms the way you manage your data estates in your object storage and your data lakes. It is designed to scale with the size of your data sets. Using Storage Actions, you can define data management tasks that target the specific blobs based on their attributes and perform the repetitive operations that is required at scale. It can scan through billions of objects to find the specific ones that meet your conditions and process them in the time that you need it. Azure Storage Actions is an event condition action framework. Its serverless infrastructure delivers a reliable platform that scales to your data management needs without provisioning or having to manage resources. You can use a no-code experience that defines the conditional logic for processing the objects without requiring any programming expertise. The tasks that you compose can securely operate on multiple data sets that have similar requirements with just a few clicks. And the monitoring overhead is also minimized through views that summarize the results at a glance. It includes filters and drill downs so that you can zoom in on the details that are of interest to you. This release supports, cost optimization, data protection, rehydration from archive, tagging, and several other use cases. And we're continuing to build more. So let's take a deeper look at the capabilities of Azure Storage Actions. These are composed of triggers, conditions, and operations. You can quickly compose storage actions using the no-code experience and validate it interactively against your data set. You can test them in real time, and you can assign these actions to execute on one or thousands of storage accounts. The assignment is an application of the storage action that defines a path prefix or the schedule of execution, which can be to run it once or on a recurring basis. And each time an action is executed, it generates metrics and detailed reports that identifies which specific blobs met the conditions and what was the result of the operation that was performed. You can access the out-of-box monitoring dashboard that we generate in the context of the storage task that you've defined, which summarizes the results for all of the storage accounts that has been executing on, or you can access it from the storage account blade where it summarizes the results of a task over time. Let's try this out. We're going to use a no-code experience to compose a storage task where we'll select a combination of attributes that identify the blob we want to process. These conditions can be using attributes based on the container or the blobs, and that can include the naming patterns, the file types, the timestamps like the creation time or the modification or the last access time. You can use metadata or blob tags. You can then specify the specific operation you want to perform on those blobs using one of several operations that we support out of the box. You can actually specify more than one operation to perform on the object. The next step is to assign the storage task to execute on your data set, on your production data set. And in this process, you can actually specify the schedule that includes whether you want to execute it once or, on an ongoing basis. And that's pretty much it. I think now you're done. And once the storage action starts to execute, as per the schedule is specified, then you can monitor them through the dashboard that summarizes the outcome of the execution. All right, so let's switch over to the portal and let's try it out. All right, so let's take a look at how you can actually use storage actions to automate this flow. In this example, we're going to look at the retention of medical imaging files. that have gone through processing through machine learning or AI that identifies the contents of the scan. And once that analysis is complete, we want to look at, retaining that data in archive for to meet a compliance requirement. So in this case, I have a storage account where if I browse through and look at the containers, I have a bunch of different data types, data sets within the storage account. And if the specific container that I'm interested in, it has diagnostic images. And if I look at the metadata around those that is identified, it says that the data type is bronze. Looking within the contents of this blob container, I have a bunch of different data types, but the prominent ones that I want to target are these DICOM images, DICOM being a medical imaging standard. And I want to make sure that of the ones that have been completed processing, if I look at the properties of those, they are identified by a blob tag. And the blob tag is going to say scan state is analyzed if it has completed processing. So what I wanted to do in this example is take the DICOM images that have a scan state as analyzed in my bronze data set, and I want to move them into archive. I also want to set a tag that identifies how long I want to retain that information for. Now, while I'm doing this, I can also check in and see, if there are, because I have data protection turned on with blob versioning. So if there are any older versions of files because they've been overwritten, I also want to move those into archive because I don't want to keep, pay more to store the older versions of files. So let's take a look at how you can actually use storage actions to automate this flow very quickly. So I'm going to start in the marketplace where I'm going to find Azure Storage Actions. And I can start creating a storage task right here. So we can start by giving my task a name. I'm going to call this a DICOM task. And I will start by identifying the container that I want to target. In this case, the container metadata had the data type bronze, as we saw earlier. And I can also identify additional clauses. So for example, I can say the name of the blob, it ends with .dicom. And then I want to target, let's say, the most recent files that were processed. So I'm going to go by creation time as an example. So I can say later than, and I can actually specify the value. And if I go take a look at this value, there are multiple ways I can specify this. And the cool thing about this is I can also use this relative to other attributes. So for example, I can compose and use metadata, durations, or other tags that have been set on the blob that specify the duration in time fields. But in this specific example, I want to actually focus on blobs that were created in the past week. So I can just say last 7 days. However, if I had a blob tag that identified how long a blob should have been retained for, I could have said, for example, it's relative to a specific tag which has the period defined within it. So here, I'm just going to look at the last week. And the next clause I'm going to add over here was based on the tag value that we saw. So if I look at the tag value that I want to set, it said the scan state was analyzed. I've actually looked at all of these. So what I can also do is I can group these clauses together, and I can add another clause where if the blob is a previous version, where there's a newer version of a blob available, and this I'm just keeping it for backup, then I can move those as well into the archive while I'm actually running the same task. So I can actually go and group these together, where I can say this is grouped and by or, right? So what I'm doing now to explain this condition is I'm targeting the metadata, the container that has the metadata data type as bronze. I've identified my DICOM files that have the tag value of scan state as analyzed. Or if it's a previous version of a blob, obviously I'm not interested in keeping that on a day-to-day basis, but I'm just going to store it for backup. So for all of these files, I now want to let's say, move them to archive. I can also add another operation over here, and I want to say that, hey, I want to keep these files. So let's say I want to set the blob tag of retention period. And for my purpose, I'm actually going to to define this as, keeping it in an ISO 8601 format. So I can set the duration as 365 days. Okay. So now we've done this, but we want to make sure that what we did is just right, that, we did not inadvertently make a mistake in the composition of this logical condition. And I can actually test that right in here when I'm at this I'm this experience. So I can actually select my data and I can specify the container that we were looking at, which is the diagnostic images that we looked at. And I can actually preview and see what is going to happen when this storage task is going to execute on this specific data set. And if I were to click here, it actually shows me what is going to happen. And I can see that, there's a bunch of data in here that nothing going to happen because they did not meet the condition. But there were other data sets that did meet the condition. Over here, there was a scan images that, where the scan state is analyzed and, the data type on the container is bronze. And hence, these are the ones that are meeting that if condition that I've defined. And hence, I'm going to move to archive and they're going to tag. And so I can verify at a quick glance that it's doing the right thing, right? So once I've actually done this verification, which is pretty safe because the data is not actually executing those operations, I'm just quickly checking and I'm satisfied with this. I can close this and I can save my storage task. In this process, I can come back and just save the task and go on, but I'm also going to go ahead and set it up for execution against the data set that we just saw. So I'm just going to select this name and I'm going to give this assignment a name, my DICOM demo task. Now, in the course of this creation of the storage assignment to execute on that storage account, I also want to give the task the rights to access the data. And I can do that right in this experience where I can specify the role assignment, the RBAC role assignment, and I'm going to give this task because it's going to operate on blob tags as well as the tiering of the blobs. It needs the blob data owner permission. So I'm going to give it that permission and I'm going to go by and I'm going to target the diagnostic images container that I wanted, or I can choose to apply to the entire storage account. In this case, I'm going to just do it on the entire storage account. I can then specify the schedule by which I want to run. I can have it run every day or every week, depending on the schedule that I'm most comfortable with, or I can choose to run just once. And for now, we're just going to run it in the next few minutes. Okay. And the final step in this process is to specify the report container on where I want the result of this storage task to be stored. And I'm going to store it over here. And I'm going to add this assignment and voila, I'm done. So that was all of the steps that are required in order to automate my data management task. And I can now just go ahead and create this. And as it's deploying within a few minutes, this is going to, few seconds actually, it's going to complete deploying. And thereafter, it will start to execute. So once we've created the task, let's see, what the experience is like once it has completed running. So I can get a monitoring view. In the monitoring view, I have a bunch of tiles that actually summarize the results of those executions along with charts that actually show those details. This storage action has done twice. It's telling me that it targeted, over 2,000 blobs and, attempted operations around about 1,500 of those. If I was to look at, which operations succeeded, I can see that as well. And if there were any failures, it's going to show me right away. Let's see the ones that succeeded. It's going to show me that there's also a detailed report that is accessible. It's showing me when those tasks ran, on which storage account, and what was the result. So if I download this report, it shows me, the details by object on, what were the specific attributes, whether it met the condition, and here, what was the operation that was performed and the result of that operation. And I can see that most of these succeeded. So I'm good, but if there were any failures, I could drill in and figure out what was specific error that I can go back and fix. So let's look at some of the common use cases for Azure Storage Actions. One of the major ones is for governance and compliance reasons, where you want to manage the retention of data for specific durations, or you want to ensure that data is purged as required. The other element is for data protection, and specifically when you have sensitive data assets that you want to preserve the blob versions or snapshots for, but there are other data sets that are not so critical to your business, where you want to not have to manage those versions or snapshots for longer durations or keep fewer of them around. So it gives you that ability and the flexibility that you need to ensure that your data protection targets the type of data set that you are covering. The other use case that is also common is to do fine-tuned cost optimization. That includes where you want to do tiering or expiry based on, let's say, file types or naming conventions that go beyond some of the requirements that are met by lifecycle management on storage. And then there's always the case of one-off processing, especially like in a case of where you want to restore data from archive and you want to bring in millions or hundreds of millions of blobs back into an online tier, or you want to reset tags for a data pipeline that you're starting over on, or you want to clean up redundant or outdated data sets. So some of the key advantages that you get by using Azure Storage Actions, as we saw, is that it eliminates complexity. Just listing billions or hundreds of billions of blobs can require infrastructure that you have to parallelize your operations, ensure there's resiliency. So in case of any disruption, the jobs can continue from where they left off. And it's also challenging to get those kind of operations completed in time. With Azure Storage Actions, you get the advantage that all of this is done seamlessly for you, and we ensure that the task gets completed with resiliency and at scale. The other major advantage is that you can use a no-code experience, so it doesn't require you to bring in complex programming expertise to get some of these tasks automated. You have pretty much zero touch serverless infrastructure. You don't have to think about any of your resources or provisioning or management around them. All you do is compose, validate, and deploy a storage task. A critical element of, when such large tasks or data management tasks are being executed on your storage account is to manage the load on those storage accounts. And Storage Actions does that seamlessly for you as well. It automatically monitors the transaction load on your storage account. It ensures that your critical workloads are not disrupted. It's going to give priority to those workloads, making really smart use of the spare capacity on your storage account to get the job done. And then it's also hands-free. So as we saw, you can quickly compose and validate your tasks, deploy them, and you can only come in and check in and get at a very quick glance, see if all's well, and if so, then you can the metrics will tell you right away, or you can dive in deep into the reports only where needed to zoom in on the failures that require your attention, and you can correct that and continue on to your day. So with that, we have a ton of resources available to you to get started. The blog actually summarizes the investments that we are making. We also have a quick start that gets you up and running in minutes. And then if you have any questions, do reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you at storageactions@microsoft.com. Thanks for watching.